Today's repair is going to be a little bit different. I'm opening a package containing a Hamilton Model 21 marine chronometer, and these were produced for the Navy during World War II. I got a really nice deal on this one, and you'll soon find out why. Now, like most proper chronometers, these feature a detent escapement, which makes them super delicate and really finicky to work on. In fact, there's an entire protocol that must be followed prior to even shipping one of these, such as arresting the balance, blocking the train, or placing the precise amount of wind into the main spring. Now, being the highly rated eBay seller that he was, the guy I bought this from had already packaged it up and had sent it on its way to me by the time I was able to reach out to him to walk him through those steps. Can't really blame him for not knowing, though. Anyway, I'm a little bit nervous on the state of things.
Doesn't look like the gimbal is really set up correctly, but I guess we can address that later. Now, before I start messing with this, I do want to engage the balance stop. This is really what I wanted to have happen before the chronometer was shipped. It prevents the balance wheel from moving without any load on the train. And if that were to happen, potentially damages the escapement itself. With that done, now I can remove the chronometer itself from the gimbal. I've never seen the inside of this, so I don't have any idea on what to expect in terms of the condition. I think the crystal is pretty well scratched up. That's a shame. The last thing I want to do is touch any of the hands while the movement's in such a delicate state. Oh, wow. So that definitely smells like the inside of a ship. Super cool. It's like diesel engine. This is where that little Allen key tightened down this lever that actually has a fork and like two little rubber grommets on the end of it that make contact with the balance wheel. And doing so makes it a little more convenient to transport and service. As I had suspected, the movement is completely run down. Whether that even matters, we'll find out. The next thing I need to do is lower this train blocking screw that's supposed to jam up the movement. You can kind of make out where the screw is right there, and this is the fourth wheel right here. So that's nice and jammed up. So now I'm going to wind the Fusee chain completely onto the Fusee cone. This will actually make it a little bit easier to disassemble. Oh, and there's a jam. Look at that. So this is what the seller was mentioning. He was under the impression that it was fully wound up, and this is probably why. So apparently what's happening is the Fusee winding stop work bar is making contact with the stop work post that's protruding down from the top plate. What's supposed to happen is the chain winds its way up the Fusee cone and presses in this stop work push bar, which then sticks out from the other side of the Fusee cone and then makes contact with this post, and therefore then prevents any further movement of the Fusee cone. It's supposed to spring back out, so when the chain comes back down, the bar retracts back into the cone, and then you're allowed to wind the cone again. I feel like I can kind of just convince this bar back into its home. I would consider myself very, very lucky if that's the only thing that's wrong with this movement. And that's why the seller was getting rid of this for parts of repair. All right, with the bar kind of retracted, let's see if I can make it clear it. Now it's time to let down the power in the mainspring You can't use the winding key because they've already designed the winding key so you don't accidentally try to wind the watch clockwise. Remember, Fusees are wound counterclockwise. So I'm going to use a simple clock winding key. The brass container was designed with a specific cutout so you can contain the movement inverted in that notch while the dial side's safely tucked inside here. I'm just going to gradually do this a little bit at a time. And that's it.
Now I can release the hairspring stud.
Before I lift away the balance cock and the balance, I'm going to go ahead and uninstall this balance stop add-on that the shipyard put in at some point. No shortage of oil stuck under there. It smells great, by the way. Move the balance cock safely. I'm kind of gonna just steady this balance because the last thing I want is to have it jam against that very delicate detent. Just gently pull it away. Beautiful helical spring, looks great. So lower pivot looks good. This is the impulse jewel, and this is the unlocking jewel. They look absolutely filthy, but no chips. And this is a two-part roller. And then as for the top balance pivot, also looks beautiful. No concerns there. The balance spring itself looks clean, no signs of corrosion. No concerns here. The upper end stone cap of the balance cock can be removed. The upper cap jewel is a little dirty, but good. And the upper balance hole jewel, about the same. No cracks, no chips. Let's try these. Okay. You know what? I'm going to use puller. That wasn't too bad. I wonder what that was for. Oh, I don't like extra parts. All right, well, mystery number one. I'm gonna need to undo the dial foot screws. Now the dial can just be read off through this slot. Now I'll remove the wind indicator wheel, the hour wheel, the minute wheel. The cannon pinion is friction fit onto the second wheel, just like many other watch movements. One thing I almost forgot to do is relieve any power in the Harrison's maintaining spring, which would be this. And that's all that's needed. Now with all the spring power removed from the train, I can proceed to remove the upper bridge of the escape wheel. and the escape wheel. The upper escape wheel cap jewel and hole jewel look healthy, just a little bit dirty. And I'll now go ahead and separate that cap jewel from its respective hole jewel. The next thing I'm going to do is remove the detent block, essentially the assembly that houses the very delicate spring detent, which is the integral part of the escapement. So I'm supporting the block with my brass tweezers as I loosen this screw. But now it's coming out. I just gotta be very, very gentle with it. And here it comes. Attached to the detent block, we've got the detent itself. These are very, very thin pieces of steel that act as a spring. This here attached to the detent is the trip spring, and then there's also the locking jewel, all extremely delicate. You can see how thin these pieces of steel are. So I'll be super careful with the cleaning process of this. This is not going to go in the basket with all the other parts. So I can breathe a little bit easier now. The disassembly from here on is a lot lower risk. This, of course, if you remember from earlier, is the setup ratchet. It's responsible for putting carrying the preload or the first couple of winds into the mainspring in a way that cuts off the least accurate portion of that spring. So this is a number 2 key in case anyone's following along. Now I get that click out of there. And finally the setup ratchet wheel itself. Now for the dust seal. There we go. Just kind of convince it free. Yeah, it's a bit sticky. That's the winding stop. I can go ahead and remove the barrel, ensuring that the chain has kind of, with slack, kind of automatically unhooked itself from the hole in the side. So the barrel can just kind of be lifted off here. Oh, yeah. That was sticky. So, and this is the troublesome stop lever that really should be under spring power, but it seems to just kind of float back and forth at will. Just like that. With the train bridge out, I can remove the 4th wheel, the center or second wheel. Ooh, very sticky. And the 3rd wheel. And must not forget the maintaining click. All right, the state of the jewels in the train wheel bridge. 2 jewels that are in the potence. This capped one here is for the balance. You notice on the right hand side there are some witness marks, so looked like there was some opinion about how this cap plate should be oriented, so I'll have to keep that in mind for reassembly. I will remove the movement plate itself from this retaining ring. This is the lower cap jewel for the escape wheel. Yeah, like the others, these jewels are quite filthy, but
Nothing's wrong with them. They're just dirty. Oh, look at that. Piece of FOD here. So I'll be honest, this kind of scares me. I bet the mainspring in here is pretty beefy. Let's get the barrel lid off and see what we're working with here. I've never worked on anything this large. A lot of respect has to be given to these springs. Oh man, that is a beefy arbor. All right. Oh, what's this here? What is this? Where'd you come from? What is that? Is that like dried up oil or something? Yeah, it's just dirt or something, because the rest of it's just coming right off the hole here. And slowly just kind of walk it out of the barrel gently. All right, it's got a little tail in there, or when it's wound up, this notch just kind of sits against here. Now I'm going to carefully unwind the chain from the Fusee cone. Kind of keep an eye out for any damage if I see anything, but I'm pretty sure the chain was in good shape. So my goal here is really just to do it in a way that doesn't allow it to kink on itself. This final link in the chain has a hook on it, and that's attached to a little post within the cone itself. So this chain will be just stored off to the side for now, prepare for cleaning. To disassemble the cone, there's a small pin here that needs to be pressed out from one side, and I did notice that there's a little dimple right here that maybe a past repairman made as a reference mark. Base can be lifted away, and this is a separate piece here. So these are the winding clicks. This would be the maintaining ratchet wheel. Again, that allows the watch to continue to run while it's being wound. I've read about 10 minutes worth of power in that little spring alone that's under this plate. There it goes. And there is the maintaining spring or sustaining spring. I don't know if there's really any advantage to trying to remove these springs. The clicks look like they may be riveted in place onto their respective posts, so I don't think these are going to come off necessarily. And now the winding ratchet wheel. And now I can turn my attention to the top plate that houses the sprung bar that's supposed to be used to stop the winding when it's full. I'm expecting to find a broken spring under this plate, so let's see.
It's the bar. There would normally be a piece of that spring that's protruding and sticking into that hole. Yeah, it's definitely shorter than I think it should be. The remaining piece of it. The left-hand side is fine. However, the right-hand side, I think, had to curve further around and then attach into that lever itself. As is tradition, all bearing surfaces are scrubbed with pegwood. That really gives the cleaning process a really nice head start. All the old oils kind of get stuck and dried on the inside surfaces of all of these, so every little bit we can do to help that process along will be to our benefit. The escape wheel and the detent are a little more delicate, and so it was recommended really just to soak them in cleaner. I'll give them a really brief, super quick rinse in alcohol as well. I say quick because the 1 joule that's on the detent is shellacked in place, and we don't want the alcohol to compromise the integrity of that shellac, so it's going to be just a quick rinse in alcohol, which should be fine. As for the balance, as a platform, so it can sit within the cleaning basket, and I'm actually just going to clean this through a traditional method, through the cleaning machine, and in doing so, it'll be a more thorough clean than the ultrasonic, also safer on the pivots than in the ultrasonic. I have to make a new spring to replace this one, and it just so happens that the 15 gauge guitar spring happens to be right about the same size, within 1/100th of a millimeter. For those that haven't learned this little hack, guitar spring is actually a perfect substitute for a watch spring. It's got just the right temper. The only trick is just getting it to the right shape. There was a little finagling that had to go on, but it's just about at the right curvature. Something like that. So there's a little bit of this 9504 grease that I'll put on the the sliding surfaces for that lever. So now that end of the spring has to go into the hole of this lever. And then the whole thing kind of has to get put into place all at once. Hopefully without it flying out of my hands. Now before I put the top cover on this, I put a little bit of grease here. So normally the lever is sort of out of the way of that post. And then once the chain is wound fully around the cone, at the last run, it's gonna press against this part of the stop lever. The stop lever will stick out, and that stop lever will catch the post that's hanging down from the bridge. And then once the train actually winds down a little bit, the chain winds off the cone and it springs back. So the spring action is what was missing and was the reason why the seller was saying that they couldn't put any kind of wind in it without it feeling like it was overwound. And now I'll go ahead and install the winding ratchet wheel. Oiling the posts for the winding clicks here. And it can also benefit from a little bit of grease where the pawl springs make contact with the clicks themselves. And as for the sustaining spring, putting some grease here, this is really the business end of the spring itself. That's going to be the part of it that's moving around the most. And now I just have to locate the pin. There we go. But we're not done there. We're going to put a little bit of grease. This is kind of the lip of the Fusee wheel that'll actually slide, because remember, if the Fusee cone is multiple pieces, so this is a metal on metal surface, and we just want to make sure that it's got enough grease here to mitigate wear over time. Just a little bit on this part right here. Now I'll lightly grease the teeth of the ratchet wheel. And then also the arbor above the ratchet needs some grease. And then this contact point. All right, so we've got that and that. Now the sustaining ratchet wheel can be married to the rest of the cone, making sure that the winding clicks are situated properly around the ratchet. And now the Fusee wheel can be in place, taking care that the end of the sustaining spring, that little post there, lands right there on the sustaining ratchet wheel. Like so. And then more grease is applied to this elevated area. All right, now for the final step, I have to remember to put this back in the same orientation it was, so that the taper pin can go back in the same hole, because this hole is tapered after all. So, and now we're just going to do a little tappy tap tap to kind of secure it a little bit. And that's really it. So that's buttery smooth. All right, so this small clock mainspring winder is a bit smaller than I was expecting it to be. And this arbor is going to be way too small to hook onto the mainspring, so I'm going to have to improvise a bit. So now I've built this custom winding arbor for my tiny clock mainspring winder. I just hope that this little guy is going to be strong enough to withstand the force of the spring, because that's really all I can fit inside this little winder, which could be undersized for the job, but it's only one way to find out. I'm just lubricating the spring by running it through some watch paper that's got some oil on it. And this is HP 1300. And just a quick check to make sure the spring will catch the arbor. Yep. The jewels are, of course, re-inspected after cleaning prior to reassembly. The bushings as well, even the non-jeweled bushings, are inspected for scoring to the inside of their bearing surfaces. Not just the jewels, but the surfaces of all the arbors, the pinion leaves, the teeth, the wheels. All this matters. Will have a material impact on the performance of the timepiece. And finally, and most critically, the detent itself mounted to the block. Now I'll reinstall the lower end zone cap for the escape wheel, which is going to go in this jewel here. I'm going to put a nice drop of oil right in the center of it with Mobius 9010. And you can kind of just make out that perfect circle of oil kind of on the outside of that center circle of the jewel. And now I can begin putting in the train of wheels, starting with the third wheel. The center wheel. And the fourth wheel. And let's not forget about the sustaining pawl, something I typically do with these kind of watches. It's always the afterthought. This is the lower balance bridge, a droplet of 9010 right in the center of the jewel. A couple of witness marks here, maybe as a guide. Maybe someone thought that was important to ensure this side of it lines up with that side. Now I'll carefully lower the upper train bridge onto the three pillars. Yahtzee. It's also a good time to just verify the end shake of each of the wheels. We don't want anything to be too stiff. It's really good freedom of movement. And don't need to go crazy with it. So this is really just more of a protective coating. Just gonna run it, cycle it through a couple of times. Now it's time to wind the chain back onto the fusee, except for maybe the last turn or two. All right, so this is probably fine. Kind of hold away this maintaining click. Over 10,000 of these Model 21s were made by Hamilton, mostly in 1942. World War II created a bit of a shortage of chronometers for the US. Before the war, most of our chronometers for the American military and the civilian customers were imported from Europe, so we had that unfortunate supply chain dependency on that part of the world. But fortunately, in 1939, when they anticipated the war, the US Naval Observatory sought American watch manufacturers to mass produce chronometers. Hamilton and Elgin both participated, but only Hamilton was selected. Next, I need to re-lower the train blocking screw. During the war, Hamilton produced 8,900 chronometers for the Navy, 1,500 for merchant ships, and 500 for the Army. In contrast to other movements of the time, Hamilton incorporated the Detent escapement and that helical, corrosion-resistant Elinvar balance spring to really maximize the accuracy it could produce. And all this will pretty much go over the fusee winding square to act as sort of a dust cover. You're technically not supposed to reuse these, however, there's no way I'm finding replacements, so it's better than nothing. And while I'm here, I'll also just double check that the fusee stop bar does its job and prevents any further turning of the fusee cone when it's fully wound up. This is now a great time to lubricate any of the bearings for the pivots. So with the chain fully wrapped around the cone, that would mean the mainspring would normally be fully wound up. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. Okay, so that's fully wound. Now I'll need to back it off by a quarter of a turn. Prior to installing the cannon pinion, I'm going to lubricate the center wheel arbor. The minute wheel post, wind indicator post. So then I can just install this minute wheel, and then the wind indicator wheel, and finally the hour wheel. Nope. Let's do it again. And then the hour wheel, wind indicator wheel. There we go. And that's all that's needed for this side, so I can actually go ahead and reinstall the dial and work to reinstall the dial screws. So if you're wondering why chronometers are so important at sea, well, a chronometer set to a known time standard like Greenwich Mean Time allows the sailors to determine their longitude by comparing it to local time. And since we know that 1 hour of time difference equals 15 degrees of longitude, the time gap between the chronometer and the local time reveals the ship's longitude. So you can imagine why accuracy is really important here. I'm gonna point this all the way at the up line here. Now it's time to reassemble the upper escape wheel subassembly. And here I'm lubricating the cap jewel. Likewise, I'll do the same for the balance jewel. Just making sure the oil ring is perfectly centered.
Just checking over the escape wheel before it gets installed, making sure there's no dust or grime on it. Well, hold on a second. What is that? What in the amateur watchmaking is this? That looks like a repivot job. I suppose that's good enough for government work. But is it actually good?
Let's see. Oh, you see that wobble? That's not good. One final check of the balance before that gets installed. The pivots look phenomenal. Roller table, the impulse jewel, and the unlocking jewel look fine. Look at this big old screw. Now the fun of reinstalling the balance stud, the balance stud back into the balance cock. Stay. Gripping this with the wrong hand. Now I'll reinstall this balance arrestor assembly. It was not installed by Hamilton from the factory, so this was an aftermarket add-on by the service center. And the reason why they want to do this is you never really want to let one of these detent escapement movements to run completely down. So that power can be preserved, but the movement can be halted for transport reasons. Now if I were to go ahead and arrest the balance, I simply need to tighten this hex. I think it's in position. Now I drop the screw in from the top, start to gently tighten it up. With the escapement in place, I can now release the fourth wheel train block screw. So at this point in time, the train is live. So right now the balance is rotated clockwise. If the balance starts swinging counterclockwise, see how it's grabbing the detent and it's pulling the locking jewel away from the tooth of the escape wheel. So now the escape wheel was able to unlock a tooth. The escape wheel tooth is now providing impulse to the impulse jewel of the balance, which would propel the balance further counterclockwise. And then at some point the detent drops off of the balance roller and lands and locks the next tooth of the escape wheel. The balance swings clockwise, comes back around the other way, and then resets for the next one. You see the little trip spring right there allowed the balance roller to bypass it to set up for the next pass counterclockwise. And again, counterclockwise is the only direction the escapement is allowed to occur. I can now prepare to start the movement at the exact time that I choose. Now remember, these detent escapement movements, you can only set the time in the forward direction. You should never set it
by moving the hands backwards. So about 5 seconds. Now. All right. What's really, really cool is the detent action happens so fast, you can hardly even tell anything's happening. So the brass bowl previously was a lacquered brass. The lacquer has worn off in places, which led to this tarnishing forming around the edges, probably due to the atmosphere that this timepiece had been exposed to, and just the handling over the years. Since this is something that I'm probably going to be keeping for myself, my personal preference is I want to clean this up a little bit, restore the satin finish, and put a fresh coat of lacquer on it. So I've got all the little bits and pieces soaking here in this little jar. And for the bigger stuff, I just filled it up with lacquer thinner, and that'll hopefully dissolve the rest of the lacquer.
Tomorrow.
With the rest of the lacquer removed, I'm going to remove some of this tarnish with some plain old white distilled vinegar and really fine steel wool. Now I'm just lightly using a brush on lacquer, lacquering the surface of the brass. Now this stuff will kind of self-level. For the smaller stuff, I'm just choosing to use some 50% thinned lacquer and just kind of dipping it into the solution. It's a little bit easier than trying to brush it all. Cool. With the bezel warmed up, to be expanded enough to be able to install the new crystal. Drops right into place. Second hand is lined up nicely. Every tick is a half-second increment. So it's been about a day. You see the wind indicator, 24 hours has gone by since it was fully wound up. And it is a couple of seconds slow. These chronometers really should be able to be run at sub-second accuracy, so I'll be able to regulate that. What you have are these kind of, they call them vernier weights. You have a pair of them on each side. You have one that's a larger one and one that's smaller. So a full turn of this large one will adjust the watch by 40 seconds. A full turn on this one is more like a couple of seconds. So I'm going to work to at least turn the smaller one a little bit inward to speed up the watch, and do the same on the other side, and then run it for another day and see how close I can get. Now I'll use a little bit of Molykote DX grease to grease the pivot mounts for the gimbal. Even these pivots can benefit from a little grease. So I think I'm missing a piece. You see how there's like a little bushing right here? Well, back here, I don't have one. That gimbal screw is just gonna flop around in there. Well, that's a bummer.
And it's just an interference fit, so it's going to get pressed right in there. Good as new. So logged in here at time.gov, and almost 24 hours has elapsed, just a couple hours shy. And so far we're running about a half a second ahead. So I don't know, I think I'm pretty satisfied with this. From here, I'll just monitor over the course of several days and sort of average out the performance and see if I need to make any finer tweaks. Didn't look like it was sitting quite level, so I'm gonna make some adjustments. It's better. The bubble level agrees. Thank you so much for sticking with me all the way to the end. And to the experts out there, please forgive my amateurness. Oh, and if you're wondering, I really wish I knew exactly which ship this piece once served on, but all I have are the Hamilton contract records. And I know I've slowed down on posting lately, but I'll only share new content when there's a unique watch or a fascinating repair that you haven't seen here before. Thanks for fixing watches with me today, and I'll see you in the next one.